All right. Welcome everyone to the learning series for Free School Black Studies. I'm Professor Dee Boos, and I will be your learning facilitator and guide for today. And in this opening video lecture, I'm going to set a foundation for how we're going to understand Black studies. And then I'm going to invite us to consider our very first figure, Mrs. Rosa Parks. So let's start at the very beginning. What is Black Studies? So we can get our slides going here. We're going to start with a definition from Dr. Robin D.G. Kelley. And Kelley is both a Black Studies scholar and a historian. And he describes it as a scholarly endeavor that tries to understand how Black people came into being in the modern world, how that process through kidnapping, enslavement, and the extraction of labor and extraction of ideas was foundational to the modern world. He goes on to say, Black Studies examines Black lives, the structures that produce premature death, that make us vulnerable, the ideologies that both invent Blackness and render Black people less than human. And perhaps most important, it is the struggle to secure a different future. And so this is one definition by Robin D.G. Kelley that he actually did in a scholarly production, but I think it's a very succinct but full definition. And so I present it to you. Now, for another perspective, let's turn to Maulana Karanga, sometimes considered controversial, but a significant contributor to the discipline, as he is the author of one of the major textbooks of Black studies. And he explains Black studies as a specialized branch of study and knowledge, a critical and systematic study of thought and practice of African people in their current and historical unfolding. Right. So we have some definitions to help us think through Black studies. And to this, I will add my own. I say when people ask me, here we go, there we go. All right. I say Black studies is a body of knowledge that centers Black people's histories and experiences in the modern world. And it is oriented toward the pursuit of freedom and well-being in the world. And when I think about Black studies, this is what comes to mind for me. I also explain that Black studies encompasses a lot. It encompasses law and policy, art and culture, the studies of health, and so much more. In fact, Black studies is Rosa Parks and Ella Baker. Black studies is also Lauryn Hill and Wycliffe Jean. It is Tupac and Huey. It is Basquiat and Jacob Lawrence. It is even Richard Pryor and Issa Rae. Black studies encompasses all of these things. Black studies is a vibrant and diverse discipline. But Black studies can make your heart ache. To engage in Black studies seriously is to be a witness, as James Baldwin tells us. And to be a witness in this modern world that Robin D.G. Kelley pointed to, is a world that is currently and profoundly shaped by racism, slavery, and various kinds of violent extraction and abuse. And these are things we both perceive and analyze in Black studies. Considering all of this, it is hard to imagine persons involved in Black studies work who would feign some kind of detached observance. Black studies was born of student activism during the Black freedom movement of the 1960s, right? There are plenty of texts that can illuminate this for you. And I have one important text here on the screen. Black studies maintains even now its original character of active investment in changing the world for the better. Okay, so hopefully at this point we have some basic understanding of Black studies, and I won't continue further talking about this because I think that you best get Black studies by doing the analytical work. So let us turn to Mrs. Rosa Parks. As you know from the syllabus and further reading this week, we're discussing Ms. Rosa Parks. And I want to say a few things here in this session before the in-depth discussion that will be held in our Thursday session. And, you know, as the Black preachers say, I won't hold you long, except I actually mean it. Okay, we're just going to do what we need to do and move on to our discussion on Thursday. So, all right. Given that Black Studies is concerned with the analysis of structures of anti-Black oppression and analysis of the fight for a new future, I want us to turn to thinking about Rosa Parks and seeing how Rosa Parks as a figure can help us think about both anti-Black structures of oppression and the fight for a new future. Now, if you watch that short little video I made about this week's topic, you know that I referred to Mrs. Rosa Parks as a figure who has been hijacked. And what do I mean by that? Hijack, right? If we are looking at a definition of that, hijack means to take control of something without permission or authorization and to use it for one's own purposes, to hijack. Right. And as I'm thinking about this concept of hijack, I am echoing the revelations of the scholar Jean Theoharis. And I'm saying that political leaders and mainstream media in America have taken Rosa Parks as a symbol for American racial progress and democracy, despite its many apparent failures, right? If you read the book, you will see this is a very key insight here that she is offering us through her scholarship. Now, and I think that she's right on point with that. I'm also suggesting that Rosa Parks, the figure, can be creatively taken back and used to highlight the diverse expressions of Black freedom work, even within a single person, and to study the dangers involved in the co-optation of Black freedom fighters. This is where I want to press in our discussion coming up on Thursday, the dangers involved in the co-optation of Black freedom fighters. Okay. Let's see if we can get to this next slide. All right. So just to backtrack, because I think it's important to talk a little bit more about Theoharis's book. Okay. I hope you have read the chapter that I recommended for our discussion this Thursday. And it is from her book, The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks. I also recommended a documentary that covers a lot of the material, obviously in a much shorter form, in the documentary film that's based on her book. So I hope that you were able to touch either one of those because they are very enlightening. So Theoharis is going to brilliantly argue that the image of Rosa Parks has been unjustly narrowed to suit the purposes of others. And she's going to show us again and again. She has meticulous research. She has very clear presentation of Rosa Parks' ideas and actions. And she shows us that while Parks was an individual who was tired of segregation on December 1st, 1955, she was so much more. Okay. Now, from Theoharis's works, there are three things that I want to highlight here. Number one, Rosa Parks was an activist, not a passive, unwitting bystander caught up in a historical moment, right? A historical moment happened around her for sure, but she was not a passive subject. She was not unwitting. She was an activist. Two, Rosa Parks lived and operated as an activist in community with other people. She was with people. We're going to talk about that shortly here. Third, Rosa Parks was shaped by and embraced Black nationalist ideas, right? Oftentimes, the narrative around Rosa Parks is about her integrationist activism, but we got to talk about the Black nationalism too, okay? So let's start with number one. Rosa Parks was an activist. not a passive, unwitting bystander. Okay, so here we go. Since the 1940s, Rosa Parks had been a member of the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP and even served as secretary of that chapter for several years. The NAACP then, as now, was a leading organization, national organization known for its work advocating on behalf of Black life and rights in the United States. Okay, and so she's doing this in the 1940s. Okay, and for context, being a Black person associated with any prominent civil rights organization, especially in the Deep South, could mark you for violence or worse. Okay, this was dangerous stuff, and Rosa Parks is doing it. Okay, she is actively participating in the NAACP chapter, but she is also taking on tasks that only the bravest would, like investigating racially motivated rapes, right? One of the famous examples is that of Reese Taylor. And she's doing these investigations and helping the NAACP put together legal suits, right, to try to make some change, right? There's a whole book by Danielle McGuire called At the Dark End of the Street if you want to read some more about that. And you can really, really get some sense about why it is that I call Rosa Parks a G. Okay. So, okay. So my point here is not to suggest that Mrs. Rosa Parks manufactured a historical moment in 1955 on the bus. She didn't, right? It wasn't something that was premeditated, okay? The fact is, on that particular day, segregation pushed her and she pushed back, okay? All right. So I'm pointing out, as historians show us, that Mrs. Rosa Parks was a determined person who regularly pushed back against injustice at great risk to herself and even perhaps and potentially those that she loved. Okay. And while Mrs. Parks was a reserved personality in public, she was not a passive person. Mrs. Rosa Parks was a bona fide activist. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. So, oopsies, let's go back. Go back. All right. Point number 2. Rosa Parks lived and operated as an activist in community with other people. In community with other people. The United States loves a superhero story, and the superhero is always taking on some impossible situations and long odds and doing it alone. It is a narrative that reinforces rugged individualism. But Mrs. Parks lived and worked in community with others. Her single act of refusal in 1955 on that bus was an individual act, but the activism that came next was in concert with her community, right? Montgomery bus boycott, of course, a community effort, okay? Parks's activism that day, prior to that day, and for the decades afterwards, was in community with other people. In fact, for years, people who were hostile charged that she was a communist agitator, in part because she had attended a multi-day interracial conference called Racial Desegregation, Implementing the Supreme Court Decision. And she went to this conference in rural Tennessee. It was at a place called the Highlander Folk School, which is important. So look it up if you're unfamiliar with that. And she was able to make this trip because people in the community appreciated her activism. This was before the bus stand, right? They appreciated her activism and thought that both she and the Montgomery, Alabama Black community could benefit from her going. So she goes, okay? So she goes to Highlander, and one of the conference facilitators was the lifelong educator and NAACP civil rights organizer, Septima Poinsett Clark. Okay. And at this conference, right, not only is she going to get some mentoring from Ms. Septima Clark, right, she's also going to socialize and study with other activists who are going to grow the civil rights movement. Okay. This is before her famous act. So this is just a few months before. All right. She goes to this conference retreat, and then She makes her famous stand. Okay. Now, thinking about all of this, this little saying came to mind to me, and you might know it. Right? It goes like this: You know a person by the company they keep. And if there's any good truth to that, I invite you to apply that to Mrs. Rosa Parks. Okay. She crossed paths with folks over the course of her life, not only including Septima Clark, but people like Ella Baker, Daisy Bates, Queen Mother Moore, the then Stokely Carmichael, Nikki Giovanni, even Nelson Mandela, decades later, expressed his meaningful gratitude for Mrs. Rosa Parks. My point: Mrs. Parks was outside, and she was for decades. And she was out there trying to change not only her own circumstances of oppression, but those in community with her. And she worked in concert with other people in the communities to try to improve life for the better. Okay. All right. Let's move on to point 3. Now, point 3 is going to be short, as this will be the main conversation for our discussion on Thursday. Okay. Point 3 is this: Mrs. Rosa Parks was shaped by and embraced Black nationalist ideas. Consider this. In November of 1963, Malcolm X came to Detroit, Michigan. At the time, Rosa Parks was living there, right? It had become her new home. Okay. So he's in Detroit and he's attending a conference called the Grassroots Leadership Conference. And at this conference, he delivered a famous speech called Message to the Grassroots, in which he declared, in part, this: Whoever heard of a revolution where they lock arms singing, "We shall overcome"? We don't do that in a revolution. You don't do any singing. You're too busy swinging. It's based on land. A revolutionary wants land so he can set up his own nation, an independent nation. There's many more things I could pull from this speech, right? But my point here is that these are clear Black nationalist politics. And who was in the audience that day? But Mrs. Rosa Parks. And it would not be her only time going to see Malcolm, right? She would make an effort to see him. So if we look at Theo Harris's biography, we can see that Mrs. Rosa Parks not only embraced Malcolm X, she also appreciated Robert F. Williams of the Monroe, North Carolina chapter of the NAACP, and he called for armed self-defense and Black political empowerment. If you want to get a full history on that, you can read the Radio Free Dixie by the historian Timothy Tyson, or you can read Robert F. Williams in his own work, called Negroes with Guns, right? So this should tell you something about the militants here, right? And she appreciated Robert F. Williams. In 1968, after the April assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Mrs. Parks attended the third National Black Power Conference held in Philadelphia. 4 years later, Ms. Parks famously is captured in a photograph at the National Black Political Convention in Gary, Indiana. And the rallying call at this conference was, "It's nation time," right? So I have here on the slide this picture of her admiring Malcolm X. That was in Gary, okay, right? So we can see here a pattern of her embrace of Black nationalist ideas. Okay. Hopefully, these are enough examples to complicate your understanding of Mrs. Rosa Parks. As we speak, a statue of Mrs. Rosa Parks sits in Washington, D.C., in the U.S. Capitol building. It opened to the public in 2013 on what would have been her 100th birthday. And this statue, like most mainstream narratives about Mrs. Parks, attempts to freeze and hollow out her meaning, her complex meanings, and to continue to make her, much like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., hijackable, hijacked to serve narratives of American good triumphing over evil, and especially to espouse notions of racial progress in America. But the questions embedded in Black studies give us the impetus to fight back with critical thinking. And all of this leads to our first discussion, which will take place on Thursday. And it will be based on the question, how and why do liberatory figures get reappropriated? How and why do liberatory figures get reappropriated? That's all I have for today. We'll pick back up on Thursday in a deep conversation. I hope that you will join me there. Until soon, each one teach one.